My friends, Great Britain, what is happening in Great Britain? Is the government of Great Britain trying to destroy it? That is the topic of today's podcast. This is our live broadcast for July the 2nd, 2026. This is the Management of Reality. Thank you for joining us. So we're seeing all kinds of mayhem taking place in Great Britain. I was supposed to talk about this last week, but I was not feeling very well, so I apologize. We didn't have a podcast last week. So this is a little bit delayed, but I mean, the topic is still very important, and it's still very, it's still in the headlines because the problem is ongoing. And we've seen a real eruption of tremendous violence in response to Muslim violence, right? So what we're seeing in Europe right now in different places, but in particular in Britain, we've seen in Northern Ireland that a Muslim was trying to behead a man in the street, and the street erupted in response, right? The British street. In Northern Ireland, we saw scenes that are incredible. We saw scenes that suggest that what we're looking at is the beginning of a civil war. So I'm going to ask Joel to give us the video that shows those images of what happened in Great Britain. So if you haven't seen them, we don't have the video, he's telling me. Oh, okay. Can you go get it, Joel? And we can show it a little later? No, it doesn't matter that it's in Spanish. Go get it. We'll show it a little later. And what matters are the images. It's not important. So anyway, while Joel goes get that, let me give you some other information. Okay, so the question here is the British government trying to destroy its own country? And it's a real question. This is not. I'm not trying to be funny, and I'm not trying to be gratuitously polemical. This is a real question because the policies of the UK government are difficult to explain under a different hypothesis. So let me just give you an example of what I mean, and when we will look at those scenes in a second. So consider this. Check out this headline. Why did UK authorities ignore 50? Explained. So this is a report on the scandal of the Muslim grooming gangs, as they call them, which is not what I would like to call them. I think they should be called rape gangs, which the headline also calls them. And well, there is a certain amount of grooming going on, of course, because some of these girls are captured by these gangs very young, okay? Very, very young. And there is grooming going on. But the point is that these girls are raped, okay? They turn them into objects of commerce. And there are girls as young as 11 years old that are being victimized by these Muslim rape gangs in Britain. And what makes this a gigantic scandal, over and above just the human suffering, because this is a lot of girls, 250,000 girls, according to this report, which is an independent investigation. Okay, this is not the British government. This was funded through public donations, as you see on the screen. And it's the survivors who are leading this effort to investigate what happened, because There is total failure of the state here. Total and complete failure of the state. We have to really stop and think about this. What makes this scandal so enormous, over and above the human suffering, I mean, it's already enormous, but even more, is that the British authorities knew that this was going on. And the evidence that has been coming out is that they were protecting the rape gangs, protecting the whole process of victimizing these multitudes of British girls. 250,000 girls. Can you even wrap your mind around this? And all of the authorities in the UK are complicit. So what's going on? It's difficult to imagine that you can produce an explanation that doesn't assert some kind of alliance between the British authorities and the Muslim invaders of Britain. And it is the British authorities who brought all those Muslims in, right? And this has been happening all over Europe. We're seeing it in Spain again. So Pedro Sanchez just announced that he was going to give citizenship to all kinds of illegal migrants in Spain. And he was talking about 500,000. And of course, there's like twice that many that are seeking to benefit from this policy. So Spain may be about to add something like another 1 million Muslims. And these Muslims are really, they're destroying Europe. I mean, if you just look a little around, if you just do a sampling of YouTube videos on this topic, you will be shocked at what's going on in Europe. It's being destroyed. So this is a real question. What is going on? And we see behaviors that are very difficult to interpret in any other way except collusion of the government with the Muslim destruction of Europe. So, for example, Question Time, which is mentioned in this headline, is a program of the BBC. It's a debate program. And so they had a question time on the question of immigration, which is, of course, now extremely controversial in Great Britain. There's a lot of opposition to continued rampant immigration. And so the BBC organized this question time show to discuss that. And the whole thing was managed. So they placed some illegal immigrants in the audience and they fed them questions so that they could, challenge Zia Yusuf, who is a Reform Party figure who was participating in that debate. So the Reform Party is taking the position that immigration has to stop. And Zia Yusuf, who is from an immigrant family, but he's a legal immigrant, and he's part of the Reform Party, and he agrees with the platform that immigration has to stop. So what the BBC did is they had these illegal immigrants in the audience who were fed questions to kind of, corner Zia Yusuf and try to move the discussion into pro-immigration. Okay, they're trying to move it all so that the impression people get is that the moral thing to do is to let everybody in. The BBC is a government institution. Why is the government, through the BBC, managing people's reality to push the pro-immigration argument? Shouldn't the government be responding to the will of the British people? Isn't that what democratic government is supposed to be? Shouldn't an organ that ostensibly is a news media organization, the BBC, simply be reporting the facts as best it can to the citizenry? But this is not what's happening. We see the government through the BBC managing people's reality to push more immigration on the British. Now, you may not know this, but so here's what the Telegraph said, because the Telegraph investigated this. They say the Telegraph can reveal that the two asylum seekers, the ones that were trying to corner Zia Yusuf, they were placed and prepared by IMIX, a charitable organization that seeks to build support for migration. Now, the principal donor to IMIX is Unbound. That's another philanthropy. This is a game they play, okay, so that you won't discover what is going on. So it's always one foundation that donates to another foundation that donates to another foundation. And by the time the money is actually spent, finding out who's all the way at the origin of the whole process becomes very difficult, okay? So it's important to try to trace it. So here we have IMIX. IMIX is being funded by Unbound. What is Unbound? Well, you get a sense for that by looking at Taryn Higashi. Taryn Higashi is the executive director of Unbound Philanthropy and has worked for or sat on the boards of organizations including the Ford Foundation, the Open Society Foundations, and so forth. And this is quite diagnostic, I think. Because the Ford Foundation and the Open Society Foundations, they're the bad guys. The Ford Foundation was heavily, so the entire Ford network was heavily involved in financing eugenics. And George Soros's Open Society Foundations is completely involved in funding everything woke, ultra leftist that is destroying the West. Both foundations are very involved in that, and they're very involved, of course, in funding programs to bring Muslims into Europe, bring Muslims into the United States, and of course, attack the state of Israel and promote anti-Semitism. They're heavily involved in that. So that's where Taryn Higashi comes from. He's director of Unbound Philanthropy, which is doing this stuff with the BBC. Now, you may not know this, but the BBC is not merely a government institution in the UK. It's on the basis of personnel. So if you're measuring media institutions on the basis of how many employees they have, BBC is the largest in the world. It's hugely significant, and BBC content is reproduced all over the place in other media, other channels. Okay, the British public has to fund the BBC. They have no choice because they are charged something that's called a licensing fee in Great Britain. So you have to pay a licensing fee to support the BBC. Even if you don't watch the BBC, you have to pay it. And if you don't pay it, the police will come to your house. It's amazing. The Brits live they're living in a quasi-totalitarian state. It's really incredible. So the Brits are being forced to pay for the system that is managing their reality with propaganda to destroy their country. That's the structure they're trapped in. Unbound is part of a transatlantic network of wealthy foundations that explicitly, they don't even hide it, explicitly seeks to reshape migration policy and public attitudes toward migration through the strategic funding of advocacy groups, communication projects, media engagement, litigation, and grassroots organizing. Okay, all this grassroots, quote unquote, that movements that you see all over the West, they're not spontaneous. They're getting money from Soros, from Ford, from these Unbound guys, and other extremely wealthy foundations that are spending all kinds of money to reshape the West and make it more Muslim. This is what they're doing. Okay. Now I want to get back to this, but I just want to see if I want to see if Yoel is ready with those images, because they're very dramatic. Okay, go ahead, Yoel. Show us what you got. Let me just stop sharing. Okay, here we go. You're ready. Give us the big screen. Mi predicción. All right. So anyway, that was going to be a after the images. I had some of my predictions from months ago where I said that I was expecting civil wars to break out in Europe very soon, and I predicted that the first one was going to be in Great Britain. And what you're seeing on your screen looks a lot like the beginning of a civil war. So after that Muslim in Northern Ireland, I believe this was in Belfast, after he tried to behead another person on the street, this is what happened, what you just saw. Ordinary Britons were going house to house, wherever they thought immigrants live, and burning up the houses. Because they're very scared. They're very scared now. And this is what happens when people get very scared. And they don't know what to do because their government is not defending them. They're not being defended by the government. So they don't really know what to do. And they feel cornered. Now, of course, it's a very bad thing that this kind of violence is erupting. There's nothing to celebrate in that. And moreover, it's extremely dangerous for all of us that this is going on because, as we've explained on other shows, if a civil war erupts, you're giving these traitors who are running our Western governments, you're giving them the gift that they need to declare a state of emergency. Okay? And we know that's what they want. We've seen them. We saw them in COVID. They were very eager to defend stuff and treat us like lab rats, to suspend all our rights and liberties and start injecting us with an experimental genetic therapy against our will, as if we were death camp prisoners, in World War II, hopeless to defend ourselves from Joseph Mengele and his cronies. That's the kind of situation that COVID became worldwide. Millions of people were treated like lab rats. Their most basic human right which is sovereignty over your own body. This was denied to us. So this is where we're going. This is what the people running the West want. They want slaves. And in order to produce slaves, because we're living in simulated democracies, and so they have to produce the argument that seems like it is grammatical within the structure of a Western democracy, right? So they need a crisis in order to remove our rights and liberties, because they know in the West, unfortunately, the citizenries have allowed the provision for declaring a state of emergency to exist in our constitutions. We shouldn't have that. I think that should be abolished, because the dangers of having that provision far outweigh the dangers of not giving the government this kind of power to protect us when there's an emergency, right? Yes, it's true. If the government doesn't have emergency powers, there's things that the government cannot do when there's an emergency. That's true. It ties their hands in different kinds of ways, and maybe in some occasions that means they can't protect us as well as they would have otherwise, and that's a cost. But the cost of having the provision to declare a state of emergency is way more is way higher. All I need to do to demonstrate this is to remind you that World War II was partly a consequence of the provision for declaring a state of emergency. Hitler didn't have a majority, but he had his goons in the streets creating all kinds of mayhem that was beginning to look like a civil war. And that was used to produce an intrigue to scare von Hindenburg, the president of Weimar Germany, who had the power to declare a state of emergency. That was a fact. It was a power that was vested in the presidency. Hitler couldn't do it, so they scared Hindenburg to declare a state of emergency. And as soon as he did, Hitler began ruling with emergency powers, and the rest is history. He was able to do whatever he wanted. Okay, and we got a world war. So I think it's obvious that the costs of allowing states of emergency are far worse than the costs of prohibiting them entirely. And there's no question that the powers that be want to use some excuse to declare a state of emergency. And of course, a civil war is a great excuse. So we have to be very careful with this. Of course, we have to defend ourselves from the Muslim invasion. Obviously, we have to do it. Yes. But I think it's wiser to get rid of these governments first. We need the state on our side to win the fight with the Muslims. If you do it in the reverse order, if you start having fights in the streets before you've removed the government, before you've replaced the people in power with someone who does want to defend the West, then you're fighting the Muslims and the state that has been importing these Muslims and protecting them at the same time. That's tough. And the state really has been protecting them. I mean, look, in Great Britain, not only were they protecting these criminal gangs, as you may have seen, because it's all over the internet, in Great Britain, if you post a criticism against Islam on Facebook, on Twitter, or one of these things, X, whatever, policemen come to your house and they arrest you. They call that a hate crime. You're an Islamophobe, and that's a crime. You can't criticize Islam. You can't criticize Muslims. You can't complain about Muslim immigration. You have to keep quiet, or the police will come to your house. It seems pretty diagnostic of what the people in power are doing, right? So we have to be careful. Naturally, we shouldn't be violent. Now, of course, we are becoming victims of Muslim violence, and it does make sense to defend yourself. I mean, if people are attacking you, you have to defend yourself. That's just normal ethics. You have an ethical responsibility to yourself. If you're under attack, of course, violence is authorized. You have to protect your life. You have to protect your property. You have to protect your family. All of those things are reasonable. But you don't want to give a gift to the people who are trying to destroy you. And a civil war would be a gift to them. That doesn't mean we can't defend ourselves, but I do think that order matters. We should try to recover our governments first, because we need the state on our side to really do this right. So anyway, I'm going to go back to my slides. Give me just a second. I want to give you the sort of the big structure of this. I have to share my screen again. Okay, so in order to understand what's going on, I think it's important to study the history of eugenics. Okay. And we have an article on the website to explain that. And you'll see there that the Ford Foundation, which is still involved in destroying the West, as we just discussed, these people before the war were funding eugenics. I mean, in fact, Henry Ford, he got the highest decoration that the German Nazi state conferred on foreigners. It was the cross of the German eagle of something or other. I forget what the medal was called, but they pinned that on him because the German Nazi state did, because they were very proud and grateful for all of Henry Ford's activities attacking the Jews and promoting Nazi Germany. Okay, so that's who they are. These are the eugenicists, the Rockefeller family, the Carnegie family. They were these gigantic fortunes were being poured into supporting the eugenics movement, and the eugenics movement is the movement that produced German Nazism. They're still in power. We're talking about George Soros. We have an article on George Soros. People say George Soros, he says he's Jewish. In this article, you'll see I lay out the evidence. It's almost impossible that he's really Jewish. The evidence is very strong that George Soros belonged to a Nazi family. The evidence is really overwhelming, and some of the most damning evidence has to do with things that Soros himself has said about his own biography and things that his own father has said. And I lay out the evidence in the article for you to examine. But how about this tidbit? At the end of the war, the Soviets arrested Soros's brother because they were convinced that he was an SS officer. Why did the Soviets think that? This was a Jewish family. It's weird, no? And the activities of George Soros are highly suspicious, because by his own admission, Soros was going around with a guy who was tasked with dispossessing the Jews of their property, inventorying the property that they were going to steal from the Jews before sending those Jews to the slaughterhouse. So Soros has confessed that he supposedly, as a Jew, he was being protected by this guy who was in charge of destroying the Jews. That's a very strange story, right? And on and on. I mean, all of the evidence is like this, right? And once you put on the table the hypothesis that Soros might not be a real Jew, because we know that thousands of Nazis and Nazi collaborators tried to pass themselves off as Jews at the end of the war. Makes sense, right? I mean, if you're a Nazi, it's the end of the war. It's a gigantic chaos. Everything is destroyed. Europe is full of masses of refugees, hundreds of thousands moving this way, hundreds of thousands moving that way, destitute, homeless. They need food. They need medical attention. Everything's these masses of humanity moving left and right. Documentation has been destroyed. Nobody knows who's who. If you're a Nazi, you take your uniform off, you dress in civilian clothes, and you join the refugee flows, right? And you try to say you're somebody else, naturally. And if nobody recognizes you, maybe you'll get away with it. And we know that many thousands of people tried to do this because at least a few thousand were caught. Now, obviously, some of them were not caught. George Soros might be one of them. And when you put this hypothesis on the table, everything George Soros is doing makes sense. He's a professional at attacking the state of Israel. All of the little groups he's funding, they're all attacking the state of Israel. That would make perfect sense then, right? Under that hypothesis. And we see him involved in the pro-migration, supporting the pro-migration movements, right? Let's get more Muslims into Europe. Now, from a extended perspective, that makes a lot of sense, because in World War II, the Nazis had a very extended alliance with the jihadi forces. Okay, very extended alliance. We have an article on management of reality on our Substack. Let me see if I have. Let me just go to management of reality for a second so that you can see it, because that's a very important article. It's this one right here. Hold on. I had it right there and I moved. It's this one right here. The responsibility of the Arab-Palestinian movement in the German Nazi final solution. So the man you see there in that photograph, that's Haj Amin al-Husseini. He's the founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement. Okay? And the Nazis had a very important alliance with this man. He traveled to Berlin late 1941, became a top Nazi, had a very important meeting right away with Hitler, where they agreed that the Arab-Palestinian movement and the German Nazi movement would work together to exterminate the Jews living in British Mandate Palestine. That didn't happen because the Nazis were defeated at El Alamein in Egypt, and they could never get to Jerusalem. But as a consolation prize for Husseini, he stayed the entire remainder of the war in Nazi-occupied Europe. They made him a top Nazi. He had his own agency. It was called Bureau des Grossmufti in German. Had a budget. He organized entire SS divisions for Heinrich Himmler that participated in the Yugoslav chapter of the Holocaust. But the worst thing he did is he worked very closely with Adolf Eichmann, administering the entire death camp system that murdered the European Jews. The Arab-Palestinian movement had a leading role in the German Nazi final solution. And this was not the only example of the alliance between the German Nazis and the jihadis. They had an extended alliance, okay? This is perhaps the most symbolic most relevant alliance was with Haj Amin al-Husseini, with the Arab Palestinian movement, but it was not the only one. Okay, so back to the PowerPoint. The eugenicists were all over the place. They were the people in power in the Western capitals. So to give you an example that illustrates the entire phenomenon, this guy, Neville Chamberlain, so friendly with Hitler in this photograph, he was the prime minister of the British Empire in the late 1930s. And he has been turned into the poster child of what is called the appeasement policy. So the policy of supposedly trying to make Hitler happy so that there wouldn't be a war. This is what they call the appeasement policy. And when you read about the World War, this is always the interpretation you get, right? Chamberlain was stupid. He was a coward. He was timid. He didn't understand geopolitics. He didn't understand Hitler. Sounds a lot like what they say today about the U.S. presidents, right? They say about the U.S. presidents, oh, the U.S. presidents don't understand jihad. They don't understand the Middle East. They keep trying to do stupid things like nation building, and they invade and they don't know how to do it. And then everything becomes a mess, and they always screw up. But in fact, this was never true of Chamberlain. It was documented in the 1980s by perfectly mainstream historians writing in the best journals, published by the best universities, Oxford, Cambridge, that Chamberlain was a Nazi. What you have on the screen is the Spanish version of the article, I'm sorry, but we have an English version. Chamberlain, it was documented in the 80s that his entire ideology was not, he was in love with Adolf Hitler. He was not appeasing Adolf Hitler. Neville Chamberlain was a eugenicist. He was promoting Adolf Hitler. His ideology was the same as Adolf Hitler's. Now we know this, well, we don't know this. I know this, and a few other people know this who have read this work since the 1980s. But this is not, the public never heard about this. When these investigations were done in the 1980s, they should have produced front page articles everywhere, because finding out that Chamberlain was a Nazi changes the entire interpretation of the lead up to the war. And as I document in this article, it was not just Chamberlain. It was the entire British aristocracy. They were all fans of the Nazis, almost to a man. Very emblematic of that is King Edward VIII. Because Edward VIII was very publicly a fan of Hitler. It's very embarrassing. But he was not alone. Right? It was a general thing. And it was not just the Brits. It was the top industrialists in the United States. It was the people running the European countries. So appeasement was not appeasement. It was promotion. They gave Hitler basically all of Europe. And Hitler didn't have to fight for it, because these people were, moving pieces on the chessboard so that Hitler would look like he was some kind of genius. Let me tell you something. Hitler was no genius. In his inner circle, you learned this reading Albert Speer's Inside the Third Reich. In his inner circle, but of course not in front of him. They would do this behind his back. They would call him Teppichfresser, which in German means carpet biter, because he would have nervous attacks in which he would throw himself to the floor and he would start chewing on the carpet. This guy was fit for a straitjacket in a loony bin. Okay, he needed soft walls. He was no genius. The eugenicists who promoted Hitler, who selected Hitler, they were the geniuses. They were making sure that Hitler became a success. And the thing you have to understand about the structure of our Western world is that these eugenicists didn't go anywhere. They're still in power. We never took them out. In this article, Can Wikipedia Make Us Free? You learn another aspect of the structure of our world, because, well, actually the combination of these two articles is very important, because in the Neville Chamberlain article, you will not only learn that Neville Chamberlain was a Nazi, you will also learn something that was also documented in the 1980s, which is that Neville Chamberlain by 1938 had complete and total control of the British mass media, clandestinely, through his friend Sir Joseph Ball, who was an agent of the intelligence services. Now, it should be obvious. It isn't. People have the wrong intuitions about these things. But it should be obvious that if a power elite gains total control, I mean, what Chamberlain achieved with Joseph Ball has been compared to what happens in totalitarian countries. Okay? The difference is that what Chamberlain did is way more clever, because he was pretending to run a democracy, you see? And the control he had over the entire British media was through the intelligence services. So what the people see is a bunch of brands. They see a bunch of different newspapers, different radio stations, and so on, magazines. And they think, well, this is a free market of information. Look at all the different brands competing to sell me news, right? You get that impression. So if clandestinely they're all controlled from the center, that's tremendously clever, because the impression of a market makes people trust the news. So the best propaganda is when you control clandestinely what looks like the free press. That's the best propaganda, because you combine control over the message, you get to manage reality, as we say. So you combine that with the appearance of a free market for information that produces tremendous trust. So it's way easier to fool people about what's really going on in the kind of system that Chamberlain set up than in a frankly totalitarian system. Because in the frankly totalitarian system, it is obvious to everybody that the state owns everything. There's only one newspaper, only one TV channel, only one radio station. They all belong to the government, and everybody knows it. So you don't have access to alternative sources of information, but at least the corruption of the system is completely transparent. It's not clandestine, it's frank. And therefore, you can silently discount everything you're hearing, right? You can say to yourself in the privacy of your mind, well, I don't have to believe, maybe I don't know what's really going on, but I certainly don't believe these guys who don't allow any competition or criticism or challenge to what they're saying. I don't really know what's actually going on, but I don't believe these guys. You can actually say that. But in the system that Neville Chamberlain set up, you never have the opportunity even to think that, because it doesn't occur to you. that what to all appearances is a free market is in fact a clandestinely controlled system. Very, very clever. Well, it should be obvious, though it isn't, that if this kind of control is established, it will never be relinquished except by force. In other words, we in order to free the British media from this kind of clandestine control, it would be necessary first to free the government from these people. You would have to wrest control of the government from these people in order to set the media free. But that hasn't happened because there hasn't even been a scandal about this. Okay, so this was documented in the 1980s, and of course, the controlled media never told the public about it. So a few specialists, a few historians documented this in the specialized journals of historiography, and the only people who learned about it are just a handful of historians who are interested in this very narrow topic about how Chamberlain managed the media. And none of this ever made it to the front page of the New York Times or prime time on the BBC or anywhere else. Of course it didn't. The controlled media is not going to tell the public that it's clandestinely controlled, obviously. And therefore, the BBC is still clandestinely controlled. And so is everything else. But focus on the BBC for a second, because in this article, Can Wikipedia Make Us Free?, we document that the rules that Wikipedia constructed for deciding what is a reliable source, right? Because so the mythology is that anybody can edit Wikipedia. It's the free encyclopedia. We can all go edit articles if we want. And when there's a controversy, they call those edit wars, right? That's when there's a controversy between different Wikipedians, right? Those have to be resolved by reference to Wikipedia's rules on sources and so forth. And Wikipedia, in those rules, explicitly says that the best example of a reliable source is the BBC. So the entire system is taken. Okay? The entire system is taken. And guess what? Artificial intelligence mostly consults when you ask it a question about anything. It mostly consults Wikipedia, therefore the BBC, therefore the intelligence services. That's how it works. Okay? So these eugenicists who are still in control of our governments, who have taken over the media and the universities in order to manage our reality and move the system in the direction of totalitarianism without us noticing what is going on. Those same power elites are using all of that power to flood the West with Muslims. They want jihad. A lot of people are very puzzled at the behavior of Donald Trump in the past couple of weeks, signing a memorandum of understanding with the Iranian Ayatollahs, as if the Iranian Ayatollahs had won the war, giving them everything they want. But from the point of view of our model, there's nothing puzzling about this. This is what they want. People are saying, oh, Trump is appeasing Iran. No. Just like Chamberlain was not appeasing Hitler. They're promoting Iran. I made the prediction before the Iran war that Trump would not attack Iran unless that was bad for Israel. And once the war started, people interpreted that I had said that Trump would never attack Iran. And they were like, see, you were wrong. And I had to keep reminding them, no, wait a minute. What I said is that he wouldn't attack Iran unless it was to hurt Israel. And once the war, and with the war raging, I kept explaining to people, I kept saying, look, the war is going to end up badly for Israel. You guys think this is evidence that the U.S. is defending Israel? Just wait. I said, Trump is not going to let Israel destroy Hezbollah. He's going to save Hezbollah. And he might even save the Iranian Ayatollahs. But somehow or other, the conclusion of the war is going to be bad for Israel. Israel is going to end up in worse shape. That's what I predicted. And look, everybody agrees that what Trump is doing is very bad for Israel. And they say, oh, he's appeasing Iran. No, he's not appeasing Iran. Just like Chamberlain was not appeasing Hitler. Just like Ronald Reagan was not appeasing Iran when he sent the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the founder of jihadi Iran, several $1 billion a year for several years in secret weapons. He was not appeasing, he was promoting. He was preparing jihadi Iran for the destruction of Israel. And the policy of the U.S. presidents after Reagan has been perfectly consistent. They allied with the Iranian jihadis in Bosnia. They imported jihadis to Bosnia in the 1990s. The Pentagon was allied with the Ayatollahs to do that, to kill Serbs in Yugoslavia. This was discovered after the Srebrenica mess, because there was a killings in Srebrenica that were supposed to not have happened because the UN Blue Helmets were supposed to be there protecting the city. It was a safe haven and so forth. And so there was the claim that a massacre had happened there and so forth. And so the Dutch government had to investigate it because the UN Blue Helmets supposedly protecting Srebrenica were Dutch soldiers. So the Dutch government investigates, and they give this guy, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Cees Wiebes, you write it Cees, that's his first name. Last name is Wiebes. Anyway, that guy was given access to all of the intelligence archives of the Netherlands. Okay. And what he discovered with this unprecedented access that he was given to all of this intelligence was that the Pentagon had allied with the Iranian Ayatollahs to import jihadi holy warriors to Bosnia to kill Serbs. Now notice how the grammar of the structure is always consistent. Why were they killing Serbs in Yugoslavia? Why was the Pentagon interested in importing jihadis to kill Serbs? Well, if you know anything about the history of the Serbs, then you know that the Serbs are the great heroes of World War II. They held Hitler so long in Yugoslavia that Hitler was defeated by the Russian winter when he attacked Russia. So we owe the defeat of the Nazis in great part, to the Serbs. So let me just show you here. If you want to read about that, go to the archive and type Yugoslavia, and you'll see here part 1, the civil wars in Yugoslavia and Milosevic's speech. And this is a series that I'm publishing. It's going to take me a while to finish it. If you want to go read more about this, you can go to my old website, which is hearhome.com. And there we have a whole section on the civil wars in Yugoslavia. Click on that, and you'll see all the articles we have on this. That some of these are more like little books. They're a series of articles. But in any case, there's a lot of material there if you want to understand better what happened in Yugoslavia. But what I want to tell you here, just one fact: the Serbs in World War II were the only people in Europe to truly put their lives on the line to defend their Jewish brothers and sisters. Okay? And they paid a tremendous price. They were exterminated just like the Jews in death camp, in a death camp system called Jasenovac in Croatia, which was the first death camp in Europe, 1941, before the Wannsee Conference in Germany that decided on building the death camp system to murder the European Jews. Okay, the first death camp was built to kill Serbs. Okay, and the Serbs were a real thorn in the side of the eugenicists because they wanted Hitler to defeat the Soviets, and that couldn't get done. They couldn't get that done because the Serbs, check this out, the Serbs were completely surrounded by the Nazis and their allies, completely surrounded. And in spite of that, they declared war on Hitler, forcing Hitler to invade Yugoslavia before invading the Soviet Union, which delayed Operation Barbarossa to invade the Soviet Union by a few weeks. And that's what cost Hitler it cost him the attack on Russia because, look, this is really amazing. Hitler was already in the suburbs of Moscow when the winter defeated him. If he had gotten there earlier, he could have defeated the Soviets. Okay? And then the Soviets defeated Hitler. I'm not a fan of the Soviets. Don't get me wrong. People then get all kinds of ideas. I'm not a fan of the Soviets. Hate the Soviets. Hate communism. But it's a historical reality that the Soviets defeated Hitler. That's a historical reality. And the reason they could is that the Serbs were heroic. Okay? So why is the Pentagon importing jihadis to kill Serbs? Because the Pentagon, they're the same eugenicists. Okay? The clear demonstration of that is in this other article. This was also documented in the 1980s by historian Christopher Simpson. That's his book, Blowback. America's Recruitment of Nazis and Its Effects on the Cold War. What he documents is that the entire intelligence infrastructure of the Nazis in Eastern Europe, Fremde Heer Oost, was simply absorbed by the US government after World War II to create the CIA. So of course those guys are importing jihadis to kill Serbs. They consider the Serbs their worst enemies. Those are the people defeating the Nazis and defending the Jews. It's all perfectly consistent. The invasion of Iraq. George Bush Jr. invaded Iraq, and what was the consequence of that? That they gifted Iraq to Iran. They made Iran more powerful, and on, right? It's all consistent. The only reason people are surprised when I explain these things is that our reality is managed. And so people have a completely incorrect picture of the system that they're living in because the media and the academia are always presenting reality in a distorted way, okay, in a distorted manner. Sometimes, very often, reality is represented exactly upside down, exactly the opposite of what is true. So, for example, the state of Israel has gone to tremendous lengths to protect the enemy population over here in Gaza. In spite of the fact that most of the people in Gaza support Hamas, in spite of the fact that the civilians have been actively participating with Hamas in the violence, in spite of the fact that nobody in Gaza made any effort to help the hostages, right? In spite of all that, in spite of the massacre of October 7th, the state of Israel has gone to great lengths to protect the Arab civilian population in Gaza. And what people hear in the media is that Israel is supposedly conducting a genocide. So reality is inverted precisely. Why? Well, because the people who control the media are the same Nazis. What do you expect? All right. So this is the situation we're in. The civil wars are coming. I think they're inevitable because the Muslims want them. The Muslims are going to fight, and we have to defend ourselves. But I really do think that. So my advice to Europeans is take control of your governments first. You need the state on your side. You need to recover the state. Otherwise, you're between a rock and a hard place. And if you do start a civil war to defend yourselves, which is understandable, you're under attack. I'm not saying you should not defend yourselves, but I'm saying if you invert the order, then the great danger is that you will give them the opportunity to declare a state of emergency. And if you want, and that will enslave us all. So if you want to read a little bit more about that argument, just before I leave, you might want to check out this article. I'll put it on the screen, and then so it's this article. Give them the opportunity to declare a state of emergency, and if you want, wait, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Okay, so this there it is. There it is, right here. Can democracy afford the state of emergency provision? And what I do there is I go into the whole theory of the state of emergency, how it has been used, the dangers in the state of emergency, and I also discuss how the people in power have been using it and why it's so dangerous for us. Okay? So you can read about that too. All right. Thank you for joining us. I hope to see you next week. Those of you who are not yet paid subscribers on Substack and who would like to come to our Q&As, we're going to go to the questions and answer session right now. And those question and answer sessions are for paid subscribers on Substack. So if you'd like to come, just become a paid subscriber on Substack. You can do it for very little money. And that little money it helps us stay afloat. So you get the benefit of coming to our Q&As and some other benefits that we have for the paid subscribers. You can comment on my articles and so forth. And we get the benefit of some support to keep this operation going, which in all humility, I think we're doing an important job for the defense of the West. So help us do more. Thank you for joining us. Subscribe, like, share. Ding that bell. And I'll see you next week. Thank you.